When 35-year-old Senator Tom Reed walked into a roadside diner in Texas, he was expecting a burger, not a scandal. But as soon as he was recognized, the waitress abruptly refused to serve him, and the room erupted in whispers. Instead of getting angry, Tom made an unexpected move that turned everything around and silenced even the biggest skeptics. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when J.D. Vance, a 38-year-old senator with tired eyes and a rumpled suit, pulled his rental car into the gravel lot of Joe's Roadhouse. It was a squat, weathered joint on the outskirts of Lubbock, Texas, a place where the neon open sign buzzed faintly and the promise of cold beer and a hot meal drew truckers and locals alike. After a grueling day of town halls, handshakes, and heated debates, all J.D. wanted was a quiet corner, a burger, and maybe a few minutes to breathe before the long drive back to his hotel. The scent of sizzling beef and fried onions hit him as he stepped out, tugging at his tie. It felt like the kind of spot where no one cared who you were, just what you ordered. The bell above the door gave a sharp jingle as he walked in. The place was small, maybe 10 tables total, with cracked vinyl booths and a counter lined with stools. A jukebox hummed a low country tune in the corner, and the air was thick with grease and the faint tang of spilled beer. For a split second, it felt welcoming, until it didn't. J.D. caught the eye of the waitress behind the counter, a wiry woman in her late 20s with a name tag that read Amy. She'd been wiping down a glass, mid-motion, when her gaze locked on him. Her hand froze, and her half-smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. He knew that look. It wasn't just recognition. It was recognition with an edge. He scanned the room. A few heads turned his way. A guy in a faded trucker hat paused, his fork hovering over a pile of mashed potatoes, and leaned toward the woman across from him, muttering something J.D. couldn't catch. At a booth near the window, a burly man with a beard and a leather jacket, probably a biker, set his beer down hard enough to make it foam over the rim, his eyes narrowing. J.D. wasn't green. He'd walked into enough rooms to know when the air shifted, when people sized you up and decided you didn't belong. But a roadside dive in Texas? This was new. Amy stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "Evening," she said, her voice tight, like she was reading from a script she didn't like. "You, dining in or taking out?" J.D. offered a tired grin, hands in his pockets. "Dining in, if that's okay." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she glanced over her shoulder toward the kitchen. Too long a pause. "Hold on," she muttered, then disappeared through a swinging door. J.D. stood there, the bell's echo fading, replaced by the hum of the grill and the weight of eyes on him. A guy at the counter shifted, his stool creaking. Someone coughed. The biker by the window smirked, like he could smell trouble brewing. From behind the kitchen door, muffled voices rose, sharp, clipped too fast to make out. J.D. rolled his shoulders, fighting the urge to assume the worst. Maybe they were short-staffed. Maybe it was a mix-up. He wasn't here to stir the pot. But when Amy came back, her jaw was set, and her eyes didn't waver. "Sorry, sir," she said louder this time, firm. "We can't serve you tonight." The words landed like a slap. The diner didn't go silent. Not quite, but the chatter dulled to a low buzz. Forks stilled. The jukebox clicked to the next song. J.D. felt every stare in the room. Some curious, some hostile, all waiting. He tilted his head, keeping his tone even. "Did I do something wrong?" Amy didn't flinch. "We'd just rather not serve you tonight." No explanation, no apology, just a wall. J.D. exhaled through his nose, hands settling on his hips. He'd faced worse. Heckling crowds, screaming reporters, but this was a gut punch. The biker chuckled, low and rough. The trucker at the counter looked away, and J.D. stood there, the senator no one wanted, wondering how a simple meal had turned into a standoff. J.D. Vance didn't budge. The words, "We can't serve you," hung in the air of Joe's Roadhouse, thick as the grease on the grill, but he wasn't the type to storm out, or at least, not yet. He'd learned long ago that walking away from a fight didn't always mean you'd won it. Instead, he pulled out a chair from the nearest table, its metal legs scraping the linoleum, and sat down. Calmly, deliberately. The diner tensed like a coiled spring. Amy, the waitress, blinked, her arms crossing tight over her chest. The biker by the window, his jacket patched with a faded skull, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a grin tugging at his lips. The trucker at the counter shifted again, his fork clinking against his plate, but he didn't look up. "All right," J.D. said, his voice steady, cutting through the hum of the jukebox. "If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to speak to the manager." The request wasn't loud, wasn't angry, just firm like he was asking for a coffee refill. Amy's eyes flicked to the kitchen again, a silent plea for backup, then back to him. "I'll see what I can do," she muttered, disappearing once more through the swinging door. The room held its breath. The biker let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Got guts. I'll give him that," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A woman in a denim shirt near the counter snorted, sipping her coffee like she was settling in for a show. J.D. leaned back, hands resting on the table, taking it all in. He wasn't naive. He'd been a lightning rod since the day he stepped into politics. But this wasn't a rally or a TV hit. This was a diner, a nowhere spot off a Texas highway, and the rejection stung in a way he hadn't expected. He could feel the eyes boring into him. Some curious, some daring him to push back, others just waiting for the crash. The kitchen door swung open again, and out stepped a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same rugged stock as the land outside. Broad-shouldered, maybe 40, with a buzz cut and a grease-stained apron tied over a faded Rangers shirt. His name tag read Ray. He didn't smile, didn't offer a hand, just crossed his arms and sized J.D. up like he was a stray dog that had wandered in. "You wanted to see me?" Ray's voice was gravelly, a challenge wrapped in indifference. J.D. met his stare, unblinking. "Yeah, I'd like to know why I can't get a meal here." Ray exhaled sharply, wiping his hands on his apron, as if the question itself was a mess he had to clean up. "Look, man," he said, stepping closer, "you're not welcome here." "That's it." J.D. raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No reason." Ray's jaw tightened, and he glanced around the diner, toward the biker, the trucker, the woman with her coffee, before locking eyes with J.D. again. "Folks around here got their feelings about you. I'm not in the business of stirring up trouble. Me sitting down for a burger is trouble." J.D. pressed, his tone still even but edged with something sharper now. Ray shifted his weight, arms uncrossing. "You're not just some guy, are you? You're that guy. The one they see on TV, running his mouth. And people here, they don't like it." Before J.D. could respond, the biker, Jack, judging by the name stitched on his jacket, cut in, his voice rough and loud. "Come on, Ray, quit dancing around it. Pretty boy here thinks he can waltz in like he owns the place. Prove you're not just another suit, Senator." He spat the last word like it tasted bad. J.D. turned toward Jack, studying him, the leather, the scars on his knuckles, the glint in his eye that said he'd love a fight. The room was a powder keg now, every ear tuned to the exchange. J.D. could have walked out, called a night, let the story fester online by morning. But instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, "All right, let's talk about it." Jack's grin faltered, just for a second. Ray's brow furrowed, and the diner, already on edge, tipped into something new, something no one saw coming. The air in Joe's Roadhouse crackled with tension, but J.D. Vance didn't flinch. He sat at the scratched-up table, his suit jacket creased from the day, hands folded calmly as if he were at a boardroom meeting instead of a Texas diner on the verge of boiling over. Ray, the manager, stood across from him, arms crossed again, his apron still dusted with flour from the kitchen. Jack, the biker, leaned back in his booth, one boot propped on the seat, watching with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. The rest of the diner, Amy behind the counter, the trucker at his plate, the woman with her coffee, seemed to lean in without moving, caught in the gravity of the moment. "So," J.D. said, his voice low but clear, "you don't want me here." "I get that. What I don't get is why. Someone want to fill me in?" Ray shifted, rubbing the back of his neck like he'd rather be anywhere else. He glanced at Jack, then back at J.D. "It's not complicated," Ray said, his tone gruff. "Folks here are tired. Tired of suits showing up, making promises, then leaving us in the dust. You're one of them. That's how they see it." J.D. nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "And you? That how you see it?" Ray hesitated, his jaw working like he was chewing on an answer he didn't want to spit out. "I see a guy who's going to cause a headache I don't need," he said finally. Before J.D. could reply, Jack cut in, his voice sharp and loud. "Oh, come off it, Ray. It's more than that. This guy," he jabbed a finger toward J.D., "he's all talk. Acts like he's one of us. But he's just another politician playing the game. Sold out the second he got a taste of power." The accusation landed hard, and a few heads nodded, subtle but there. J.D. turned to Jack, meeting his glare head-on. "You don't know me," he said. Not defensive, just stating a fact. Jack snorted. "Don't need to. I know your type." J.D. leaned forward, elbows on the table. "All right, tell me something then. What's my type done to you?" The question hung there, simple but loaded. Jack blinked, caught off guard, his smirk fading. The diner went quieter still. No clinking forks, no jukebox hum, just a faint sizzle from the grill. Ray watched, arms loosening slightly. Jack straightened, dropping his boot to the floor. "You want to know? They come around every few years, guys like you. Shake hands, kiss babies, tell us they'll fix the jobs, the roads, the mess. Then they're gone. Plant's close, rents spike, and we're still here eating the scraps." J.D. didn't break eye contact. "I know that story," he said, his voice softening but firm. "I lived it. Grew up in a town where the steel mill shut down and took half the families with it. Watched my mom work doubles just to keep the lights on. I'm not saying that makes me you, but I'm not some silver spoon kid who doesn't get it." The room shifted. Not a big move, just a ripple. The trucker glanced up from his plate. Amy's rag slowed on the counter. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't fire back. Not yet. Ray stepped closer, his tone less hostile now. "So, what? You're here now, sure. But what's that change? You'll eat your burger, drive off, and we're still stuck." J.D. shrugged, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe, but I'm not running out the door yet. You've got me here. Say what you need to say." Jack scoffed, but it was weaker this time. "You're full of it," he muttered, though his eyes flickered with something new. Doubt, maybe. Ray studied J.D., then exhaled hard. "You're a stubborn son of a bitch. I'll give you that." J.D. chuckled, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. "Been called worse." For the first time, a few people smirked. Amy, the woman with the coffee, even the trucker. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. Jack leaned back again, arms crossed, still skeptical, but quieter now. Ray shook his head, almost amused. "All right, Senator. You want to talk? Fine. But don't expect us to buy what you're selling." Yodde nodded. "I'm not selling. I'm listening." And with that, the diner didn't just watch anymore. It started to wonder. The standoff in Joe's Roadhouse had shifted gears. J.D. Vance sat at the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, taking in every twitch and glance from the crowd around him. Ray, the manager, still loomed nearby, his arms now resting on the back of a chair, his tough exterior softening just enough to hint at curiosity. Jack, the biker, stayed in his booth, his leather jacket creaking as he crossed his arms, his skepticism a wall J.D. hadn't yet breached. The jukebox clicked back to life, spilling a slow Willie Nelson tune into the air, but it couldn't drown out the weight of the moment. Jack broke the silence, his voice dripping with challenge. "All right, Senator. You say you get it. Prove it. What's a guy like you even doing here, huh? Not like you're hurting for a meal." His words drew a few nods, quiet but there. J.D. didn't bite the bait. Instead, he unbuttoned his cuffs, rolled up his sleeves, and leaned forward. "Fair question," he said. "I'm here because I've been on the road all day, talking to people who think I'm either their savior or the devil. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and this place looked like it didn't care who I was. Guess I got that wrong." A dry chuckle escaped him, and it landed softer than anyone expected. Ray tilted his head, studying him. "You're still a suit. Tired or not, you're not one of us." J.D. nodded, conceding the point. "Maybe not, but I've been close enough to know what it's like when the world moves on and leaves you behind." He paused, then added, "Mind if I get a beer while we figure this out?" Ray blinked, caught off guard, then smirked. "Amy," he called without looking back, "get him a shiner." The waitress hesitated, then grabbed a bottle from the cooler, popping the cap with a flick of her wrist. She slid it across the table, and J.D. caught it with a nod. "Thanks." Jack wasn't done. "A beer don't make you local, man. What's your play here? You gonna talk us into voting for you?" J.D. took a sip, the cold bite of it grounding him. "No play. You've already made up your mind about me. I'm not dumb enough to think I'll change it over a drink. But if you've got something to say, I'll hear it." Jack's eyes narrowed, but before he could fire back, an older voice cut through from the counter. "Hell of a thing," the man muttered, his gray hair poking out from under a worn cap. His name tag, barely visible on his faded flannel, read Harry. He didn't look up from his coffee. "First politician I've seen who didn't run when the door got slammed." The comet hit like a pebble in a still pond. Ripples spread. Amy smirked faintly, wiping the counter slower now. Ray's shoulders eased, and even Jack's scowl softened, though he'd never admit it. J.D. turned to Harry. Appreciate that. You've been here a while. Harry shrugged, sipping his coffee. Long enough to see a dozen of you come and go. Most don't stick around past the handshake. J.D. grinned. Well, I'm past the handshake part. What's next? Jack seized the opening, leaning forward. All right, tough guy. Prove you're not just hot air. Sit with us. He jerked his head toward the booth, where two other bikers, silent till now, watched with guarded eyes. It was a dare, pure and simple. J.D. didn't hesitate. He grabbed his beer, stood, and slid into the booth across from Jack, setting the bottle down with a soft clink. Deal, he said. What are we playing? Jack's grin returned, surprised but approving. Poker. 5-card. You in? J.D. nodded. I'm in. Ray watched, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. Amy, get him a plate too, he called, then muttered. Might as well feed him if he's staying. The diner buzzed. Not loud, but alive again. Harry chuckled into his coffee. Damn fool, he said, but there was a hint of respect in it. Jack dealt the cards, his rough hands quick and sure, and J.D. picked up his hand, glancing at the faces around him. The wall wasn't gone, but it was cracking. For the first time that night, the tension wasn't a weapon, it was a bridge. The cards hit the table in Joe's Roadhouse with a soft slap, the sound blending into the low hum of the jukebox and a clatter of plates. J.D. Vance sat across from Jack, the biker's scarred knuckles flicking out a pair of jacks to claim the pot. $3 in crumpled ones and a handful of quarters. J.D. tossed his losing hand, a measly pair of 5s, into the pile with a shrug. You're good, he said, taking a pull from his shiner. Jack grinned, all teeth and triumph. You're not, he shot back, but the edge in his voice had dulled, replaced by something closer to grudging respect. The other two bikers at the booth chuckled, sipping their beers, their guarded stares softening as the game wore on. Ray stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like a man who'd bet on a storm and got sunshine instead. Amy slid a plate in front of J.D., a thick burger stacked with onion rings and a side of fries, steam curling up from the grease. Don't say I didn't warn you, she muttered, but a faint smirk tugged at her lips as she walked off. J.D. picked up the burger, took a bite, and chewed thoughtfully before deadpanning. Fries are a little soggy. The table froze for half a second. Then Jack barked a laugh, loud and rough, slapping the table hard enough to rattle the bottles. Smart ass, he said, shaking his head. Ray snorted, turning back to the kitchen with a muttered, unbelievable. The diner was alive again. Not the tense, brittle quiet from before, but the warm buzz of a place settling into itself. Harry, the old-timer at the counter, spun his stool slightly to face J.D. You play poker like you talk, too honest, he said, his gravelly voice carrying a wry edge. J.D. grinned, wiping his hands on a napkin. Guess that's why I'm down $3. Harry raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. Better than most suits I've seen. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was something, a nod from a man who'd seen too many promises fade. Jack leaned back, stacking his winnings with a lazy flourish. All right, Senator. You stuck around, I'll give you that. Still don't know if I buy your whole, one of us bid. J.D. met his gaze, steady but not confrontational. Don't need you to. Just wanted a burger and a chance to hear you out. Jack's eyes narrowed, searching for a catch. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate, like he'd decided J.D. wasn't worth the fight tonight. Fair enough, he said. And that was that. Ray wandered back over, hands in his apron pockets. So what now? You gonna tweet about this? Make us famous? His tone was half joking, half wary. J.D. chuckled, pushing his plate aside. Nah, I'll finish my beer, leave a tip, and get out of your hair. Unless you've got more cards to deal. Ray smirked. Think we've had enough excitement. He paused, then added, You're not what I expected. J.D. tilted his head. Good or bad? Ray shrugged. Just different. The jukebox flipped to a new song, and the diner settled into its rhythm. Forks clinking, low chatter, the hiss of the grill. J.D. finished his meal, left a 20 under his plate, and stood, brushing off his sleeves. Thanks for the game, he said to Jack, who tipped his bottle in return. Don't lose next time, Jack replied, a glint in his eye. J.D. nodded to Ray, then Harry, and headed for the door. The bell jingled as he stepped out into the cool Texas night, the gravel crunching under his shoes. Inside, the conversation picked up where it had left off, but it was different now. Lighter, less certain. Jack shuffled the deck again, muttering something about damn politicians. Harry sipped his coffee, staring at the door. Tough bastard, he said to no one in particular. Ray shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. And in that small, nowhere diner, a story ended not with a bang, but with a quiet shift, a moment where a man didn't just walk away, and a room didn't quite know what to make of it. It wasn't peace, not fully, but it was enough.